Lexi Daly here with your next Stamp-a-Faire challenge. We have made it to the 9th anniversary tradition of pottery. So when I first thought about creating something with pottery, I thought about my favorite bowl. It was, I think, a Mother's Day present from my family, and it just has my favorite color, yellow, on the interior, and I just really like the technique that was used, kind of like an etching away and leaving some black. So I just wanted to use this as an inspiration piece to create the paper version of pottery and an embellishment for my card. We are going to be using paper clay. Pottery is, taking clay and turning it into something beautiful with glazes and shapes. And so we're going to be using paper clay to create paper pottery. So when you're working with paper clay, the first thing you need to do is simply roll some out. And I'm just going to take a nice little chunk here, play with it a little bit. And when I roll it out, I like to kind of start with a ball and kind of press it down. And I like to put a plastic bag over it. This helps with sticking for me. It also kind of gives it a smooth finish. I'm able to move it around a little bit more. It's just kind of a trick that I've picked up. And I'm going to be making a heart, so I just want to make sure that I have enough space, and I do, for the heart. And then I just I think I want to turn it sideways a little. This is a non-stick mat, but even this, the paper clay sticks a little bit. It's good to let it just kind of sit a little bit. So we're going to just give it a minute or two before I start stamping. I find that it's a little less sticky and a little easier to stamp. I'm going to be stamping with black ink for this black and white, look. I've also done pieces where I've stamped without any ink, and you could do that as well, and then color it a different way, either paint it or color it in with markers. And an example of that is this one right here, where I stamped it directly from the Stamp-In. That's where letting the clay sit a little bit helps, because you don't have ink on it as a barrier between the stamp and the paper clay. And then I brushed on color afterwards with the ink pad to get this look. But we're going to take it and stamp into it. And here's a finished piece. This was with a ink pad that needs re-inking. It was black, but it didn't turn out very black because I didn't have as much ink on my stamp, but it's still very pretty. So we're going to use this one, which is pretty inky. And I've got a small flower stamp that I found from Make It Market Mini Kit Sunshine and Rainbows. And I just was looking for a small scale flower for this particular project, but any stamp you want to make a pattern with would certainly work. So I'm going to start in the middle. Oops, already I forgot to ink it. I'm going to start in the middle and just stamp and release. And I'm going to continue along, building up a pattern as I go, or not really a pattern, but just building up my image as I go. Okay, so here's my finished piece. I want to go ahead and cut it before I set it aside to dry. So I just lifted it up off of my nonstick mat a little bit, and I want to get my shape now while it's still wet, because I think it's a little bit easier to manage for some cutting. So for this big part, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it and get it out of the way. So I'm just going to pick a good spot, put my die on top of it, and I'm going to cut around the die. If I were to put this through the die cutting machine, it would just spread out. If you wait until it dries and then try to put it through the die cutting machine, then a closed die actually presses the design out of it. It's a cool effect. It reminds me of another piece of pottery I have where it's painted and not textured. And it is kind of cool, but I really wanted that texture for this piece. So that's how I came up with this way of doing it. And I'm actually just using a letter opener because I like the feel of it. And I'm just going to press around, holding the die in place lightly. I'm not really pushing on the die. Okay, so I'm going to lift this out of the way. And there I have my heart. I can, because of the nonstick mat, I can kind of push some of these extra little fuzzies out of the way. But really, after it dries or when it's close to the end of drying, it's easy to cut these away and leave a smooth impression. So that's all I'm going to do with it right now. And to dry them, you can certainly just leave it sitting on your desk. But if you have some kind of like a baking rack or something, it helps because then the air can circulate above and below and it doesn't take as long. So I'm going to keep the scraps. You can go ahead and cut something out of them right now, or you can cut something out of them later. I also have another idea that I'm going to show you of how to use the scraps. So here's the finished one, and now we're going to make a card. So I really wanted to highlight the yellow interior. I like how it's kind of, you can kind of see some of the stroking along with the black and white of our pottery piece. So I have a card base in Harvest Gold. To get that kind of streaky look, I decided to just take the Harvest Gold ink straight to paper. If you prefer, you could also use a brush for this, but I'm just going to take the edge of the pad and just swipe it across several times. The next thing I wanted to do is kind of just, I'm making one of my favorite clean and simple cards here. So my embellishment, my little paper clay pottery embellishment will take center stage. And we have our finished card. Happy day. Now, so I just wanted to show you some of the, one more suggestion for those scraps as promised. And this is another version, a little bit more detailed. We'll call it a little step up. So what I did here was I decided to create a pottery mosaic. So this is just the straight up pottery embellishment. This is using the scraps to create a mosaic. I created a template out of the die on acetate, which left a hole for me. And I used embossing paste to put on a layer of embossing paste in the shape of the heart, took the stencil off, and then I simply cut apart different pieces of the scraps and filled in the spaces. Again, if you try to put that particular die through the die cutting machine, because it's a closed die, it will smush the heart. It may even smush it from the cutting plates with an open die, but I didn't have one to try that was going to work well. So really all I did was cut different pieces. I had some smaller pieces and I just cut them up and made a little puzzle out of it. I think this technique would also be great for maybe a stripe across the card, and then you can set in different pieces and create a mosaic that way too. Other patterns would be really cool if you did several different patterns but all in red, and then you put them together. That could be neat. But there's a lot of different things you can do with this, and it really depends on what die you're using to lay down your embossing paste, what shape you're going to do, and it could be really interesting. So here are the two different takes on using pottery embellishments on your card and using a specific piece of pottery as your inspiration. Now it's your turn. Head on over to Nicole's blog to find out all of the information on how to play along and link up. I can't wait to see what you create. Thanks for watching. This has been Lexi Daly for Paper Tray Inc. Bye!